Less than 24 hours ago, against the predictions of just about everybody except the most dedicated SpaceX fans, NASA announced that this was their exclusive solution for landing on the moon. Not getting to the moon, mind you, but landing there. This is going to be Artemis's equivalent of the Apollo LEM. Now, just about everybody, including NASA themselves, assumed that there would be two finalists making it through to the second round, that there would be a backup solution in case the primary solution didn't work, or that there would simply be competition between two subcontractors. However, because of limited funding, their choices were narrowed down to one, and this was the choice. Now, as just about anybody who watches my channel knows, my ultimate solution or favorite solution for landing on the moon involved a combination of the Lunar Starship and the Dynetics Alpaca. This combination seemed to be the most efficient and the most effective way of getting human beings to the surface of the moon and scouting it out for future colonization or future bases. However, had NASA been allowed the funding that they really wanted, this is not what would have happened. They would have gone with SpaceX, and they would have gone with Blue Origin. Once this became clear, I started to study the NASA report in detail to try to find out what they found superior about the Blue Origin solution to Dynetics, because that actually meant quite a bit to me. And what I found was perplexing. No mention whatsoever of the fact that 2/3 of the lander is non-reusable, and this is according to their own website. And also, no mention whatsoever of the infamous ladder as a weakness. However, they did list off other weaknesses with this lander, several of which are also weaknesses with the Starship. And the Dynetics lander also had weaknesses which are shared with the Starship. All of this started to become very confusing to me, and I decided to make this the topic of this particular video, because a lot of people are going to be talking about SpaceX's Triumph. I'm going to talk about what NASA used as criteria for their decision to determine whether or not this decision was simply made on the basis of money or something else. And all of that is coming up in just a few minutes. Good morning, and welcome to another episode of the Angry Astronaut. Yes, I'm coming to you sans glasses because I think it's important that I look all of you in the eye while I'm talking about what I'm going to be discussing in this particular episode. First of all, first and foremost, I was wrong, dead wrong, as I announced yesterday. I guess officially I'm batting a little over 600 because I was correct about NASA's decision to resupply the Lunar Gateway using the Falcon Heavy and a modified version of the Crew Dragon. I actually made a video about that before the announcement was made. I've got that linked in the description if you're interested in going that far back in my history. And also, of course, my prediction that the RS-25s were not what was responsible for the early termination of the green run. However, regardless of where I am officially in my assessments or predictions or whatever, this is definitely the biggest one that I've ever been wrong on. At the same time, though, wrong in a very good way in a lot of respects. I mean, obviously, honestly, if you're a SpaceX fan, this is the biggest moment in the history of SpaceX, and it will not be surpassed, in my opinion, until Starship actually lands on the moon with human beings and returns them safely. That will be the next big moment, but this is the moment for SpaceX. Even though they've accomplished some incredible things up to this point, the fact that NASA has tied their entire future, the future of human spaceflight, is now in the hands of Elon Musk exclusively, because regardless of what happens with SLS, regardless of what happens with Orion or anything else, if Starship does not put human beings on the moon, then we do not return to the moon for a very long time anyway. And, of course, that's in the Western world. What they're doing in China and Russia, of course, is something entirely different. But nevertheless, as far as the Western world is concerned, everything rides on Starship. And this both excites me and terrifies me. So, of course, one of the first things that I did right after the conference call was over, actually, yesterday, was look at the bid, look at the criteria that the decision was made under, try to determine why NASA made the decision to go with one provider, to put all of their eggs in one basket. And it came down to price when you get down to the very fundamentals of it. That was the main consideration. But frankly, I am glad that they didn't have the funding available for a second choice, because based on what the report says, they would have gone with Blue Origin as the second choice, which would have turned a risky solution or a risky decision into a mind-bogglingly stupid one. And I am very glad that they didn't do that. However, once it became clear that Blue Origin was choice number 2, I decided to really look into detail as to the criteria from a technological standpoint that this decision was made under. And what I found was a little bit disturbing. There's a fair number of inconsistencies in this report. Inconsistencies in terms of how different, competitors were judged in this decision. And I'm going to share all of these with you. And 99% of the time, I'm not going to add any of my own viewpoints to this. I'm just going to quote exactly what it says in the report and let you guys make your decisions as to what that actually means. But nevertheless, of course, I'm going to have my own editorial comments here and there, but nevertheless, I really just want to share a lot of the high points of the decision and what this might mean to the future of Artemis. So enough of me talking to you right now. Let's get right into it. Predictably, the report praises and correctly identifies the immense advantage that Lunar Starship has when it comes to the sheer amount of cargo that it can deliver to the surface. Quote, SpaceX's capability will support the delivery of a significant amount of additional hardware, including bulky and awkwardly shaped equipment for emplacement on the lunar surface. This has the potential to greatly improve scientific operations and EVA capabilities. The value of this capability is even more apparent when considered with SpaceX's ability to support a number of EVAs per mission that surpasses NASA's goal value and EVA excursion durations that surpass NASA's thresholds, unquote. The report includes many other advantages, such as, quote, the application of its excess propellant margin to expedite descent to lunar orbit in the event of an emergency early return, we'll get to that later, a comprehensive engine-out redundancy capability, and 2 airlocks providing redundant ingress-egress capability. All very impressive. Now, let's talk a little bit about the weaknesses that were identified. This was the first issue that I found to be kind of curious. Quote, "The scale of SpaceX's lander also presents challenges such as risks associated with an EVA hatch and windows located greater than 30 meters above the lunar surface." Now, if they mentioned the height of the lander as being a challenge for this particular solution, why was this not mentioned with the Blue Origin lander, which has not an elevator, but a 10-meter tall ladder and all of the dangers associated with that? But the most significant concerns are as follows, quote, "While I find the positive aspects of SpaceX's technical approach to be notably thoughtful and meritorious, these aspects are, however, tempered by its complexity and relatively high-risk nature. Of concern here is the assignment of a significant weakness within SpaceX's proposal under Technical Area Focus 5, Launch and Mission Operations, due to SpaceX's complicated concept of operations. SpaceX's mission depends on an operations approach of unprecedented pace, scale, and synchronized movement of the vehicles within its architecture. This includes a significant number of vehicle launches in rapid succession, the refurbishment and reuse of those vehicles, and numerous in-space cryogenic propellant transfer events." Now, numerous is a bit of an understatement, and I'm going to take you to one of my favorite Delta V maps and try to explain it to you. The Delta V required to get all the way from low Earth orbit to the Moon's surface is roughly the same as the Delta V required to get to Mars, assuming you use the Martian atmosphere to help your landing process, as SpaceX intends to do. That being the case, the current SpaceX plan for getting to Mars involves using 5 tanker refuels in order to accomplish this. So if you need 5 tankers to get to Mars, and therefore the Moon, you would need 5 more tankers to get back. So 10 total tanker refills minimum in order to accomplish this, plus extras in order to account for the surplus propellant that the proposal talks about. Now, I'm not just making this stuff up. Robert Zubrin, who is a rocket scientist, by the way, and I've linked his article in the description, actually claims that it would take 20 Starship launches, including the Lunar Starship launch, in order to get people to the surface of the Moon and then get the Lunar Starship back to low Earth orbit in order to be reused. Now, I'm not quite so pessimistic as him, but still, it would require a lot of refills. Zubrin goes on to point out that landing the Starship on the Moon with 100 tons of cargo and the 120 tons of propellant it would need to return to the Gateway without its cargo would require at least 120,000 pounds of thrust. Without a landing pad, this would blow a large crater below the Starship during landing, creating a landing surface that would be a difficult thing to predict and might make landing very difficult, if not impossible, and yet this particular weakness is not mentioned in the NASA report. Presumably they found some sort of solution for this, although I really don't know what it is. Now, one obvious way to correct this situation on all counts would be to not carry 100 tons worth of cargo, but only the necessary cargo for a number of EVAs for 2 astronauts on the surface, which would be a hell of a lot less. At the same time, though, the less cargo that you carry, the less advantageous the Starship is. The NASA report goes on to say, "I acknowledge the immense complexity and heightened risk associated with the very high number of events necessary to execute the front end of SpaceX's mission, and this complexity largely translates into increased risk of operational schedule delays. However, these concerns are tempered because they entail operational risks in Earth orbit that can be overcome more easily than in lunar orbit, where an unexpected event would create a much higher risk to loss of mission. Fair enough, but still, this equates to most probably at least 9 to 13 launches just to land on the moon once. And that is something that may take a while to perfect. Plus, as I already mentioned, I'm not sure how NASA intends to address the problem of decelerating over 100 tons worth of mass onto a surface with only 1/6 gravity without creating an enormous debris plume and the resulting crater. Nevertheless, since this wasn't listed as a problem, we must assume that they've resolved it somehow. The report lists other problems with Lunar Starship, but let's get on to Blue Origin and all of their issues. The main problem that NASA has with Blue Origin is the fact that their engines on this particular lander, indeed almost all segments of this lander, are not at a high level of maturity and would not be fully tested until almost the 2024 date. So it really leaves things up in the air as far as whether or not the Blue Origin propulsion solutions will actually function. That's a very legitimate problem. On top of that, there are communications link problems with this design that have yet to be resolved. Those are significant issues, and that's only just the beginning. However, it is at this point that I start to get confused. Quote, in particular, Blue Origin's choice of cryogenic propellant for the majority of its mission needs will require the use of several critical, advanced technologies that are both low in maturity and have not been demonstrated in space. Blue Origin's propellant choice also presents challenges in terms of storage temperature, which only increases the difficulty of maturing the necessary technologies. The problem is, Blue Origin is using Methalox, almost exactly the same propellant that SpaceX is, and yet SpaceX's choice in propellant is not listed as a weakness. And here's a criticism that I find very difficult to understand. In particular, the proposed mission profile requires a jettison EVA to reduce the ascent element mass prior to liftoff, but the series of activities required to perform this jettison EVA extend the duration of crew operations for ascent day. I share the SEP's concern that this is likely to be very taxing on the crew, which could increase safety risks. That's going to be taxing on the crew, but not a 10-meter ladder that the crew is going to have to climb up and down in an environmental suit on a daily basis. How thoroughly were these designs studied? And far be it from me to defend Blue Origin. Their lander is 2/3 non-reusable, which makes it much more expensive regardless of what the report might have to say. And the ladder, of course, is a serious concern. I don't see how it can be overlooked, but it was. And yet, to criticize the propellant choice and the fact that it hasn't been tested in space, even though SpaceX has exactly the same issues, and yet not to mention this in the SpaceX proposal, is a strange inconsistency. But I'm not going to waste a lot of time focusing on Blue Origin, who in my opinion shouldn't have won anyway. Instead, let's move on to Dynetics. Now, this is supposedly the worst of the landers, and yet it has some surprising strengths. Quote, first, Dynetics' proposed single-stage integrated descent-ascent element lander design requires no in-space integration of lander elements or staging separation events. This pre-integrated design will allow for terrestrial testing of the entire system, which will increase the fidelity of testing data generated. I concur with the SEP's conclusion that this design greatly simplifies Dynetics' proposed architecture and its ability to execute. Specifically, Dynetics' low-slung DAE will enable easy access to the lunar surface and will minimize risk of sustaining injuries during ingress and egress operations, particularly while handling scientific samples. The report goes on to say, quote, "This design feature also facilitates the crew's ability to attend to incapacitated crew potentialities with a short translation path from the surface to the crew module. Finally, Dynetics design includes 2 crew stations, providing redundancy during operations, as well as large windows that will maximize field of view during approach and landing. I agree that collectively, these design aspects will enhance operational effectiveness and reduce risk to the crew," unquote. However, this lander has one very significant problem. Its mass estimate was wrong, and to quickly summarize what this means, it weighs substantially more than Dynetics claimed it was going to weigh to begin with, which means that its propulsion is going to have to be substantially increased, or a substantial amount of mass is going to have to be eliminated somehow, which would mean a redesign of its propulsion system or adding additional engines at the very least. This is a significant problem. However, for a moment, let's apply the same level of standards to a particular SpaceX issue. While it is understood that SpaceX is going to require a large number of tanker refills in order to carry out their mission, these tankers will need to land successfully and be reused. However, thus far, during the base period of evaluation, SpaceX has been unable to successfully land any of their prototypes. Although this may change in the near future, it has not yet occurred, and sows a fair amount of doubt into the process. Now, this is not what the report said, obviously, but it very easily could have. And what I'm wondering is, why is Dynetics being held to this level of perfection and the other competitors are not? Why is it so difficult to assume that Dynetics would not be able to resolve these particular issues, whereas SpaceX will be able to resolve their reusability issues in the same time frame? It just doesn't seem to be a level playing field. Of course, I am biased as far as Dynetics is concerned, but there is another criticism of this lander that confuses me even further. Since this lander requires refueling in cislunar space, NASA claims that Dynetics assumes that there will be, quote, "a much more optimistic and mature level of technical readiness for its in-space cryogenic fuel transfer." Moreover, Dynetics' proposal lacks detail concerning operational specifics of this capability and is unclear about key component design attributes. This lack of detail raises questions about Dynetics' ability to address these admittedly significant development challenges and to develop a viable propellant transfer capability. However, this is also assuming that Dynetics will be unable to transfer a few tons of propellant in cislunar space, but SpaceX is going to be able to transfer 1,200 tons worth of propellant in low Earth orbit in the same amount of time. Again, it just doesn't seem to be a very level playing field. Now granted, this doesn't change the fact that the Dynetics proposal is indeed flawed. All 3 of these proposals are flawed, so really the only thing distinguishing them is the price. And when it comes down to it, I think that's what made the decision here. NASA only had so much money available, and SpaceX was the only one able to deliver at the desired price. Will this provide the best solution for Artemis and the quickest deployment of astronauts to the surface of the moon? Time will tell. So, as I often say in my concluding remarks, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I do not believe that NASA has made a bad decision here. I believe that the Lunar Starship will ultimately be able to safely land humans on the surface of the moon and return them to the Lunar Gateway safely. I believe that ultimately that is going to be not only possible, but I believe that it will happen. I also believe that ultimately Starship is going to replace SLS completely. As to whether or not NASA is ever comfortable with sending sending astronauts up on a rocket that does not have an abort system, as Starship does not have right now, is anybody's guess. I find that to be pretty unlikely given their mindset and given all of the hoops that they made SpaceX jump through as far as Crew Dragon is concerned. But nevertheless, as far as everything else is concerned, I do believe that Starship will be able to accomplish this, and it will be a triumphant moment for SpaceX. However, what I do not believe is that Starship is going to be able to check off all of the enormous number of boxes required to make all of this happen. Between life support, between the Super Heavy that has yet to even be tested, between everything else, orbital refueling, and the large number of landings, to say the least, and successful landings and takeoffs, etc., that are going to be required in order to fully refuel Starship, or very close to it, in order to achieve everything that NASA describes in this report. In order to accomplish all of these things, that's not going to happen in the next 3 years. And I made a promise about Starship not making it back and successfully landing from an orbital configuration this year, that I would eat a Boeing hat. I'll eat a Blue Origin hat, or a portion of one anyway, if Starship is able to do all of these things by the end of 2024. I find there just to be too many hurdles for it to jump over in order to accomplish this. I do believe that Artemis, the successful completion of Artemis, has been delayed as a result of this decision. Now, in the long run, I think that this will be a benefit, because NASA has not only decided to go with Starship as far as the moon is concerned, it's pretty clear that they're going to go with Starship as far as Mars is concerned too. And NASA plus SpaceX going to Mars is a winning combination. One of the reasons why I'm wearing this t-shirt, although you can only vaguely see it, but it's NASA's mission to Mars. And now that mission to Mars is almost definitely going to include the SpaceX Starship. It is a very positive thing. But nevertheless, I am not going to shake my pom-poms for this decision without thoroughly examining all of the criteria that were used to make it, and then ask some uncomfortable questions about what I see are inconsistencies. And that is all that I have done here. And I certainly hope that this decision was not just made on price, and that had this decision been made on other criteria, we might have been able to get to the moon more swiftly and more efficiently with another solution. I certainly hope that that's not the case, because there are some indications in this report that suggest that. All of that having been said, I am one of the very few people who's probably talking this way, especially since I'm a supporter of SpaceX and the Starship as far as, the long-run exploration of the solar system is concerned. I think that it's the best solution, but not a lot of people are talking the way I am right now. If you like the way that I talk, I put this stuff out there regardless of who I might offend. It is my honest opinion. It's all in the description as to how to support me, and my intention is still to go see SN15. I'm very excited about that because a lot is riding on it. So until the Starship successfully brings human beings back to the moon and returns them safely in what is going to be a triumphant and unparalleled moment in human history, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.